Okay, so good afternoon. I was going to say we're not really in the afternoon, but hello everyone. My name is Debbie Corcoran, and as Karina said, I'm a lecturer in the medical science lecturer here in GMIT, or ATU Galway City. Now, some of you may have heard some of this before. We did a talk, or I did a talk on this a few months ago in Sligo. This is a kind of a more LinkedIn version of it. But what I want to say at the outset is, based on the presentation I did on this a few months ago as part of this project, feedback that I received from people that day, I have implemented in the assessment this year, because that was prior to doing this assessment with students. So just at the very beginning, we're talking a lot about feedback, and we're talking about giving students feedback and the importance of it. I'd like to emphasise the importance of events like this and the feedback that we get from each other. So there has been a slight change to the assignment based on the feedback that I got from people in that audience a few months ago. So just a very brief background. Obviously, the module is part of the medical science programme. It's year one that this is carried out, and the module is microbiology. As part of this module, there is a large practical component. So the theory that would be delivered in lectures is absolutely complementary to the practical side of the module, and vice versa. They go hand in hand. One of the practical sessions that are carried out as part of the module is titled Microorganisms Are Everywhere. And basically, within this practical session, that's what the students are proving. There's microorganisms in the air, they sample the air, they sample surfaces. But a very, very important part of this for the medical science students is in relation to clinical infection control hand washing procedures. Now, prior to March 2020, when the pandemic hit and everyone became au fait with the importance of hand washing and the steps involved, you're all well familiar with that now, the different ways you're meant to wash your hands. We would have been doing this always with the medical science students at a first year level. They're obviously training to become medical scientists, and the discipline that I deliver and that I teach them is microbiology, which leads into medical microbiology in second year and fourth year. So it becomes a lot more focused because that's what they are training to become if they choose to go into that laboratory, medical microbiologists. So the module in year one is fundamentals of microbiology, and links then, it begins to link into the medical aspects of it. Obviously, the establishment of an infection, how microorganisms cause infection, is really important to understand. And that's where this practical session links in with. One of the easiest ways to stop the chain of infection that we refer to in relation to infection and the spread of infection is to break the transmission link between people. And one of the most effective ways of doing that is effective clinical control hand washing procedures. So the students learn how to do this correctly using soap and water, and also with alcohol gel. And again, people are a lot more familiar and au fait with the two different ways of hand washing now, thanks to the pandemic we've all just lived through. So historically, the students wrote an individual written report on the practical session. So a lot of our practicals, historically, it was all written reports. We are trying to move away from that. Again, encompass UDL, give the students multiple ways of communicating the knowledge that they're acquiring. So this was reimagined a few years ago to a group work, interactive video creation piece, which incorporates student-generated feedback as well for their peers. And this is one of the new parts this year, coming from feedback, as I said at that conference a few months ago. So it's very much changed the dynamics of the way the students have to present the work on the practical session. And very much linking in with UDL. We've heard a lot about UDL this morning as well. It allows the students, again, a different way of communicating their work. It's not just all report writing on every single practical session. It's very inclusive. They work as a group, they work as a team in relation to the assignment associated with this practical session now. They do have to draw on prior knowledge. So remember I said the theory complements the practical session, so they would have done with me at this stage a whole lecture on the establishment of infection and the different steps and the importance of hand washing. And it's very, very relevant. We've heard a lot this morning as well about employability. This is so relevant to the profession that they're going to be entering into when they graduate, that they have an absolutely solid foundation in the importance of clinical infection hand washing procedures, and particularly if they go into work in the medical microbiology laboratory. So the learning outcome that is addressed, or that this assignment links to, is recognising and applying safe practice for the handling and disposal of bacterial cultures and clinical waste in the laboratory. So that's just straight from the module descriptor, and what this particular this learning tool is linking to for the students. So the instruction that the students get, they come into the laboratory, they're given instruction obviously on what they're doing during the practical session. The lab demonstrator will go through the clinical infection control hand washing procedures with them using both soap and water and the alcohol gel. They do an experimental part of this where they look at, or they assess the level of microorganisms on their own hands. So they sample their own hands, their fingerprints and thumbprints prior to washing them using these methods. And then they follow the method, they wash their hands with either soap and water or alcohol gel. They work in a group and they pick which one they want to do, and then they resample their hands. That allows us to give them real-time results, because the bacteria or fungi on their hands will grow on the agar plates. So they can actually see what was on their hand, their fingers and thumbprints, before and after the clinical infection controlled hand washing procedures. If they followed it absolutely correctly and per instruction, there should be a 99.99% reduction in the amount of growth on the post hand washing. We never say 100% because you can't say 100%. Any hand washing products, it'll be 99.99% reduction. And some of those results are amazing. When they look at them, you're like, oh my God, did you wash your hands at all, or did you rub them off every surface after washing your hands? Because we see sometimes more growth afterwards than before. So we changed usually they used to write up a report, but then I was looking at it and I wanted to get them kind of engaging more in it, and that they understood why they were doing something. That was really important, because this is a key critical component of their learning. And when they go out into their practice placement now in third year, it's actually a requirement that they have been exposed to hand washing workshops. So this links in with that as well. So what they're now asked to do is, as a group, to create an educational video for the GMIT Microbiology YouTube channel that I set up a few years ago, detailing how to carry out the clinical infection control methods of hand washing using both soap and water and alcohol gel. And also in the video, they need to explain why the methods are important and where you would use them. We don't need to use clinical infection control hand washing procedures in every facet of our life. They're important in certain areas and in certain scenarios, particularly if you're working as a medical scientist. Obviously, working in a medical microbiology diagnostic lab is very different than working in a physics laboratory. You're working with live pathogenic microorganisms that can cause infection if you don't work with them correctly. So the students, the demonstrator giving the lab will have gone through all of the instruction as to how to do these procedures. They'll have done their real life experiment pre and post. And then the students are told that, okay, now what we want you to do, and they're given a large amount of time to do this in the actual practical session. In your group, we want you to create, to film yourself washing your hands, and then they're given X number of weeks to put the video together, to edit it, to add text to it, and they then upload it to the GMIT channel. The marking criteria, so this is just a very quick breakdown, and they get 5 marks for the title, how they do the message, why they do it, etc., and then the overall video production. But the 2 changes there that were made this year as from feedback from people at the last conference was, we did increase the weighting, because people felt the last year when they were asking me about this, what is the weighting, that there's a lot of work goes into this, and the weighting was quite low probably for the amount of work that went into it. So we increased it this year to 5% of the 20% practical component. And that's something we can look at again next year. We might even increase it a bit further, because we do acknowledge now, and it made me acknowledge when people said it to me, the amount of work that does go into it for the students. We also introduced a peer review. Now, we only gave 5 marks to it this year, and again, it's something that we might go back and look at and reevaluate, but it was just to get the students engaging a little bit more, and when they're working as a group, to peer review their group members. So that was interesting. So I'm not going to play the video, we don't have time today, but these are just some snapshots of the title pages of some of the videos on the YouTube channel. This one is a really good one. It's Warner Brothers Pictures Presents, and it's the music and everything. And then the next slide is how to wash your hands correctly, clinical infection control. So they're just to show again, they have free rein on how they put together this video and how they present it. So it's an example of an authentic assessment. It's timely, it's inclusive, and it's motivational. Feedback, sometimes students are a little bit reluctant at the very beginning when I say to them, you know, I want you to put together a video, but then they really like the fact that they have time to work on it, they have time to put it together, and it allows them to divide up the workload when they're working as a group. They also actually enjoyed the production of the video this year as well, with the feedback on that. And just to acknowledge a few more people, Dr. Sharon Duffy, who worked on the peer evaluation part of this year with me and delivered the module 2. The medical science students, the first years for engaging with it, even though sometimes they're a bit allergic when they hear about it at the beginning, but they do get involved and they do engage and they enjoy it then. And Mary McGrath for inviting me to speak again on the topic here today. So thank you very much.
Okay, so what do I need to press here? So, 15-minute break. I love it. No, that one, that's me. So, good, it's a good afternoon yet. I think it is, isn't it? So good afternoon, and as you can see, I'm Trish O'Connell, and when I was thinking about what to actually do for reimagining assessment, all that was going around in my head was a soundtrack, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. Come with me and you'll be in a world of pure imagination. Well, I think the next line is something about defying explanation. Well, hopefully I won't do that part. Anyway, that's not working. I'm clicking furiously. Maybe I just use the mouse. Okay, so basically, I will try and be as quick as possible so that Mary doesn't give me the old ding dong here. I'll give you a little bit the context of where I come from in terms of medical science. I'm not a medical scientist. I'll talk to you a bit about how I reimagine assessment. I've got a twin focus when I do it. I'm going to talk to you about learning-oriented assessment, how I actually implement that as the workshop activity in Moodle, and then very briefly I will talk to you about year 2 and year 3, how I use authentic assessment. Okay, so I am a lecturer in mathematics and statistics in medical science. I teach year 1, year 2, year 3, and I'm the stats advisor for year 4. So I'm very much involved in medical science, but I am not a medical scientist. So when I talk about authentic assessment, you'll see what I'm talking about. So when we're thinking about reimagining assessment, like most people in this room would think of assessment as trying to make sure that students have met learning outcomes, that they have achieved them, and that's what we're trying to do. But I think it's important if we think of assessment in terms of giving students the opportunity to get feedback to improve their learning, and the feedback should be timely, actionable, and useful to them. So how I do that is I use David Carlos's model of learning-oriented assessment. I'm just putting that up there, I'll talk more about it in a second. And also because of the fact that my students are going to be going into a medical laboratory, I think it's very important, whoops, what happened there? It's very important that they also have experience of the kind of terminology and stuff that they're going to use in a medical science laboratory. Moving swiftly along, so Mary doesn't ding dong me. So when we think about assessment-oriented learning, or learning-oriented assessment rather, you can see there there's 3 interlocking circles. The first one at the top should be fairly obvious. We're talking about the assessment of learning. Have students actually met the learning outcomes of their program or their module? Then we have learning for assessment. This is where we have the student getting feedback from the assessment as to whether or not they are improving and how to help them improve their learning. And finally, on the left there, the blue circle is about using the student as the connector between the assessment and the learning. This is how I do it, okay? So this is a workshop assessment activity. And I think this came about, well, initially came about 2018, I think it was. It's hard to remember, the days are starting to go a bit funny in my head. We used to have students do journals, and there would be a hardback copy, and there would be a time in the classroom where we do peer review, and they would swap journals, a bit chaotic. And then came the pandemic, and then I think it got a lot easier actually, because now we could give the students the journals, and there they are at the top here. As I do the topic, and what I didn't realise until Rhoda did her presentation there was, I've actually been doing ABC and I never knew about it, because I tend to look at my learning outcomes and I teach to them. I teach my topics to reflect the learning outcomes. So basically what we do is, as I'm doing a topic, I will give them a journal section, and that will be a certain number of questions based on that part of the course. And then as I move deeper into the material, I give them another section to complete, and they go away and they do those, and then towards the end they will do a quiz. The quiz is more about a summative assessment of whether or not they're actually able to do the questions, and then at some stage in the future, maybe towards the end of the topic, we'll do a peer review. And I'm really grateful that I have got my peer review colleagues here in the class with me. Rachel used to work with me, and Joaquin actually now does the job for me, so I'm not really involved at all anymore. It's kudos to him. So, and as you can see there at the very bottom, we also have, I'll use the mouse to scroll, really easier. We have the solutions to these sections here. So let me just show you how it all works. So this is the most brilliant peer review methodology, because it gets the students to actually correct each other's work as well, or not even so much correct, but review and assess, and also correct their own. So it starts off with that they get a section to complete, and they can complete it in their own time, or they can complete it in tutorial sessions. So what they do is they get a number of sections over the course of the topic, and they will complete those in their copy, and then they scan them and they upload them to the workshop facility on Moodle. And then what they do is I will give them solutions, and they will self-correct, and then at the peer review session they will also peer review somebody else's work. And it's great because we don't have to get involved in handing copies around the place. It's all done automatically, which is wonderful. Okay, and this is what the students will then assess each other. So you can see that it's a rubric that we have, which gives them marks for attempting, not necessarily for actually getting these 100% correct. But if you make a decent attempt, you'll get marks. If you get everything done and you get them correct, you get full marks. And where that leads to then is this goes into the grade book. So you can see here that for this particular student, she got 90% in the quiz. She got 62.5. She got 5 marks out of that possible 8 marks there for the actual submission of her work. And she got 2 marks for reviewing somebody else's work. Because even if you don't actually do the journals yourself, just purely by turning up and peer reviewing somebody else, you will get 2 marks. You won't pass on that, mind you. And then at the very end, we have the final grade here. And you can see this particular student got 3.19 for Journal 4. That's 3.19 out of 4.17, because I do 6 journals over the course of the semester. And that works out as being 6 times 4.17 is 25%. Hopefully my maths is right. So overall, you can see here, the way it works is the students get 53.3% for attempting. They get 13.3 for reviewing somebody else's work, and the quiz is worth 33%. So basically, this workshop is assessment as learning, because they are learning all the time when they're doing it. Moving on then, so that's the first year experience. And they do seem to like it, actually. I mean, they all do it, don't they, Joaquin? They turn up, they do it, and they get marks, and it helps them pass overall. Moving on to year 2, I said I have been banging on about authenticity for so long, because I remember when I was in college, it would be a case of a plane traveling at 400 miles an hour, traveling in a northwesterly direction. Somebody jumps out of the plane, and I'm thinking, I will never jump out of a plane. Why do I need to do this? So when I came to teaching, I decided that I would try and make everything I do as authentic as possible. It also, and I didn't realize this at the time, feeds into the whole UDL experience as well, because we're all about engaging students, and authenticity just helps get them engaged. So what I do for year 2 is I will use as much authentic examples as I possibly can. And the thing about it is that the students actually like this. I'm not sure if this is the right slide. It is. Yeah, so the students seem to like it. If it was a year-long module, they'd love to do some more of it. They really enjoyed everything about the module, which is great. I'm not sure they really enjoyed the assessment, but they have to do that too. So in terms of assessment, what we do is I have a weekly lab where they're actually using statistical software to actually do these authentic type. You can see here a 2-sample t-test between 2 different labs. When they go out into practice into the hospitals, they might very often have to be comparing between labs. So they're using my statistics to actually do stuff that's real to them, or will be real to them, because this stage are only in year 2. They also have to do, so that there, the lab then is assessment for learning. Then we do the midterm assessment, which again is all very much related to the medical field. And then finally they do the summative, the exam. So everything that I do, and I won't lie to you, it does take an awful lot of time. Like I spend an awful lot of time stuck in peer review or PubMed and trying to read stuff which will inform me, because I'm not a medical scientist, but I think it's important to bring the medical science into what I teach, which is the statistics. In year 3, we have the same basic idea, except now the students are going to go out on placement, so they're actually going to be going into hospitals, and consequently I think it's even more important that what I teach them is authentic. So I teach them things like method comparison, because again, when they go into the hospitals, it is something that they're going to be doing. I try to put as much emphasis on them understanding the reason why we're doing it, and also then when it comes to assessment, I give them I've lost the plot altogether. I give them lab work. I give them, what do you call the other things again? I blanked. CAs. This is a CA. I'm so tired at this stage of the year. My brain has completely and utterly shut down. And then I said, because they're going to be going to the hospitals, they have to be doing Levy-Jennings charts. So they do that for their final exam. They have to be able to interpret it. Now, granted, when they go into the hospital, it's all going to be automated and they won't have to put as much effort. But if the machine ever breaks down, they need to be able to understand it. Okay, so in that sense, I think that I have covered pretty much every aspect of learning-oriented assessment, bringing authenticity in. And I know that Naomi mentioned about Sally Brown, and if you haven't read any of Sally Brown's stuff, I'm actually in it. So is one of my colleagues, Aoife O'Brien. I think she's listing online here. Definitely worth a read, okay? So the feedback from the students, they think module relates to the job of medical scientists. I am much gratified by that one single sentence, because I think that shows that they are getting the reason I'm torturing them. They say it's good to get an insight into an area which might be overlooked by students because other subjects are mostly theory-based. Funny, I thought what I taught was theory-based, but hey, you know, I'm not going to argue with my students. Nice break to deal with numbers rather than words. So that's it. Thank you very much. And on to Brigid. Catch up here, Brigid. No, hang on. Which one, Brigid? That one. Okay. Good luck.
So thanks very much for having me, and as Karina mentioned, I'm only a new member of staff, so I've learned so much here today, and absolutely any feedback on the assessment that I'm going to discuss would be welcome. So I'm just going to briefly talk you through an assessment that I do with the second year medical science students. So the module is actually scientific and professional communications. And this was completed in semester 1. So I suppose to mention that the classes were still being run online on Microsoft Teams when I was running this module last semester. So the learning outcomes for this module are as follows, but in particular the assessment that I'm going to discuss relates to the learning outcome number 3, which is to identify ethically appropriate means to communicate patient results as a medical scientist. So this module, I suppose, is quite important in the sense that it's the only kind of communications module that they do, you know, apart from maybe the learning and innovation skills in first year. So it's really, I suppose, important to kind of get them thinking about the point of view of when they're working as a medical scientist, the importance of communicating, and I suppose the implications of when communication actually breaks down. So the assessment topic that we were looking at relates to, as I said, the ethical communication of patient results. And in particular, we were looking at 2 different handbooks that kind of outline the role as the medical scientist in communicating results. So there was one published by the HSE and one by the Institute of Biomedical Science in the UK as well. So another, I suppose, aspect of the assessment that I wanted to incorporate was for them to actually consider the patient outcomes due to poor communication. So in order to do this, we looked at a case study that was a video from a patient advocate. So we looked at that, I suppose, realism aspect of what actually happens when communication breaks down in the medical sector. So rather than, I suppose, providing them notes or things to learn off, you know, we were looking at that real life scenario. And when we look at the assessment questions, you'll see how they had to use, I suppose, their own knowledge and initiative in answering them. So as I mentioned, the assessment was carried out remotely because we were still on Microsoft Teams at the time. And the weighting of the assessment was 15% of the overall module. So the design of the assessment was relatively straightforward, and I suppose that's not, I suppose, the innovative part of it. So it was just 2 questions, and they were worth 7.5% each, and the students were given 1 hour to complete the assignment. So they were given these 2 questions, and they had to write or type their answer and upload it to Moodle then. So really the innovative nature that I would consider of this assessment was achieved by changing the focus of the questions. So rather than, I suppose, getting them to learn off things and you know, testing their memory, I really wanted to try and get them to think and come up with their own ideas as well. So the first question that I used for this assessment was outline the classification of critical patient results according to the handbook and explain your role as a medical scientist for each category. So again, getting them to consider when they are going out and working as a medical scientist after they've completed the program, you know, what's their role and the importance of them in this communication aspect. And the second part of this question was to give an example of one analyte within each category. So based on how, I suppose, if it was high risk or low risk, the analyte was to the patient's health, it would be ranked accordingly in these handbooks. And briefly discuss why it had been designated within that category. So really I was asking them to bring in information from other modules that they might have covered at a second year level for that particular question. And the second question then was to outline 3 ways a medical scientist can reduce the possibility of transcription errors when giving critical results verbally, and also to briefly explain the potential impacts of this error on patient care. So again, really asking them to think and use their own initiative to answer this question in particular. So in terms of actually marking the assignment, I did create a grading rubric on Moodle, and this was very handy from my point of view in terms of getting through the assignments efficiently, because we do have large class sizes of over 40 students. So I just took a screenshot of kind of the rubric and, you know, that I developed for this. So for each part of the question, I broke them down into kind of 2 parts, since I had 2 questions almost within each question. And for each, I marked them between 0 and 5 points, depending on how well I thought they kind of addressed the components of the question. And also, luckily, we were able to include feedback as well in these little additional boxes. So from listening to Naomi's talk earlier, I do see how my feedback was quite critical, and maybe how I could change that going forward to be more kind of actionable that they can take forward with them. So because of using this marking rubric, we were able to get the results back to the student in a very timely manner. And also I was able to create a document with some more general feedback that I could go through with the students in class shortly after the assessment. So while it was still, I suppose, fresh in their mind, because I do wonder if they do take the time to click back onto the assignment and see the feedback. So I find if you actually, you know, take 5 minutes in your class to go through the common mistakes or things that people could improve upon, I think that does resonate with them quite well. So just looking back now, I suppose having another semester of experience, I think there are some strengths and weaknesses to the overall assessment. So I think the question design could have been improved upon because I was asking a couple of questions within one main question. So I think going forward, it would be clearer if I broke them down into kind of sub parts. And I did notice that some of the students didn't answer all the aspects being asked. And I think that could have been the reason why. I think one of the strengths was the fact that I did change the focus of the question. So rather than giving them notes to learn, and especially in the remote setting where they could have had them up on their computer, I think getting them to actually think for themselves and have their own opinions was a strength, and I suppose where the innovation comes in this assignment. Question 1, as I mentioned, enabled them to draw on information they would have covered in other modules. So at a second year level, they would cover a lot of science-based topics. And this was, giving them that opportunity to draw on that information. And also question 2 then, making them consider the impact on the patient. So again, I think this is really essential because it's, it's something that's only really focused on in this communications module in second year. So when they go to work in the laboratory, that they do consider the patient at the other side of the sample that they're receiving. So that was a nice quick world-stop tour of the assessment. So I'd just like to thank Dr. Brian Moore and Sheila Flaherty, who designed and developed this module, Dr. Mary McGrath and Eleanor Rainsford, who invited me to present here today, and Emma MacDonald as well for communicating with me and organising this brilliant symposium. So thanks very much, guys, for your time and attention.
Sorry. Okay. Okay, so I was going to start where Brigid lays off by thanking again Karina, who's not here at the moment, but just to acknowledge and to thank on behalf of myself and Mary to be invited to take part in this project, and Emma as well for all your help in the collaborations. So I suppose at the outset, I think I have to acknowledge even at talking at break and so on, I don't think there's any question but that on all of these programs, and probably on programs throughout our 3 institutes or our 1 university now, there's no question that we're not doing authentic and innovative assessment. And at the risk of boring you with some more of it, which I'm going to do a little bit of here, I think towards the end of this, I'll probably be talking more about how, at a program level, we might, and Brona talk in particular, I want to go back to that as well. So in terms of this project, in terms of the what, well, obviously the project was the reimagining of the assessment and the feedback, of course, in the program. And when I was invited onto this project, and Mary, it was at a really opportune time. It was this time last year, and we were talking about assessment. We're always talking about assessment on the program, and programmatic review was starting up again. We had started it had stopped for COVID, but it was starting again, and assessment was a theme. So it was all falling into place. And originally, the project that I and Mary envisaged was reimagining assessment and feedback on the entire program. But we very quickly realised that that was a very huge amount of work, and that we weren't probably going to get all of that done. So we focused instead on what we were already doing, and you've seen some examples of that here today. The why, I think this is a really important part of any project that anybody starts. Why are you doing it? Why are you reimagining anything? And again, I think we're already doing an awful lot of innovative and authentic assessments. So what new are we trying to do here? The how, we'll come to that. How exactly do you go about it? And again, Brona, acknowledging your talk earlier on the ABC. That's a really good resource to look at, but I'll just go through what I did myself here. And again, just as important as why, well, did it work in the end? Then we should all be asking ourselves that of all of our projects that we undertake. So I'm just going to take an example at a module level. So yeah, you can look at these at the module level, at the stage level, and at the program level. And as I said, the program level was just, it's an ongoing project, shall we say. So at my own module level that I chose here, it's a year 4. It's called Hematology 2, but it's in year 4. It's a very chunky module. Oops, excuse me. It's 15 credits. It's delivered in year 4. There's about 7 learning outcomes, and incorporated in those are practical competencies. So it's delivered over 20 weeks. There's plenty of lectures, 4.5 hours of that per week, and then I deliver about 12 laboratories. The assessment of the module is still pretty traditional in that there's a final examination and there's a continuous assessment made up of that practical element and the theory, and it's broken down. Again, you'd see this breakdown across a lot of modules. There's a lot of consistency, I suppose, in our programme in terms of how assessment gets broken down. So why did I want to, look back at this particular module and reimagine maybe assessment and how I provide feedback? So I wanted to move away, Debbie has talked about it earlier, from that tradition of report writing. We bring to teaching initially what we learned ourselves, and of course, way back it was report writing. And when I started here, a lab, how you assessed what somebody did in a lab was, write a report on it. So I wanted to move away from that because it isn't that authentic. Naomi talked about that earlier, and lots of people have made reference to that. I wanted to provide something that was more authentic and balance the workload. Our registrar talked about that earlier, about this over-assessment, and definitely there was a lot of small assessments in this module. And I wanted to ensure that at the same time I'm examining important skills. The students are at year 4 now. So they're really looking at critical, analytical and communication skills. So there's not really much extra on this slide, except that I chose a particular section of the module, which was the continuous assessment and the reporting of what they have done in the laboratory. So as I say, the original assessment when I started, and like this module or this program is running for the last, well, over 15 years now. So, traditionally 12 labs would have meant 12 lab reports. So that's a huge burden on students on top of any other assessments they might be doing. So over time, so this hasn't just happened in a year, it has happened over time, but I'm kind of pleased to see that actually, yeah, I am incorporating some formative feedback that will feed into what we call the summative assignment part, or assessment part. And over time, I've just changed those laboratory reports to be something different that I think will be useful for them going forward. Especially thinking about that capstone module, which is their final year project, but also in their work. So rather than 12 laboratory reports anymore, they do about 5 assignments. They might do a small literature review. So work that they have done in a couple of laboratory activities, I might get them to look at the theory behind that and to do a small literature review on work that they have done there. They might do something like a mini method comparison that's really relevant to them for not alone their project, but their working lives. I've emboldened one here on a poster assignment and a peer review, because that's one I'm just going to explain in a little bit more detail. And then other things like reviewing national guidelines or international guidelines, and then looking back at something they've done in the lab and identifying the difference. What did we, or what were we not able to do in our limited resource environment compared to what you would do according to best practice. And then something like designing a case study. They're in their work lives, they'll come across lots of interesting cases and perhaps present at conference. Okay, so I'll move on, I'm told. So very quickly, one of those assignments was to design a poster and incorporated peer review. So the instructions were, you're working in the laboratory, you want to explain to somebody how to do something, and I took review of blood films as an example there, and they're allowed to do that in the form of a poster or an infographic. It's really authentic. You will want to do that. You will want to explain something. Have a poster up beside a microscope reminding people of how to systematically review something. So that's going to be displayed, I told them, in your laboratory beside the microscope, and people are going to be reviewing it every day. So these are examples of the work that the outputs. And you can see, you know, a lot of opportunity again for them to use their creative side of their brain, but also really importantly, they had to synthesize that information and they had to get the most important stuff onto the poster. I'm expecting that animation. More examples there, I won't go through, but it's all really, really different, and all of them kind of, I was able to, what worked well for me was that, I was able to assess what they had done and see that they had learned or met the learning outcome, if you want to put it that way. And another part of that was peer review. They had to look at, I said, it turned out that some of your colleagues have carried out the same activity. Now you need to decide, well, which one is the best. So they're given a set of instructions there and a rubric of sorts to have a look at that. The $1 million question, does something like that work? Yes, absolutely. From my point of view, I'm able to see immediately whether they have learned from this activity or not. And then the students, we know that the students, and they have told me, you know, that this is something that is far more enjoyable than the traditional report writing. So we got that out of it. So just to wrap up, sorry, I suppose I want to acknowledge that this is still at a module level. I'm still only looking at the module level here, and we have lovely examples from different modules. But the next part of this project for us would be stage level, but ultimately program level assessment. And this is just an overview for you just of that challenge that we have. We have so many modules. We have about 20 members of staff to try and get on board in terms of, you can see in this diagram here, just the different modules at the different stages. There's quite a lot of modules over 4 stages. We've already done a bit of work in that we've looked at the program as a whole and seen themes and themes that run through modules. And that's a really good starting point, getting those lecturers from different stages of the program together to maybe reimagine assessment from one stage to the next, and then work on it that way. But I'm going to finish up there, and thanks everybody for listening, and thanks everybody again, Karina and Emma, for the invitation.
So thanks very much, ladies. And there might be some questions, such a wide variety of examples shared. Does anybody have a question for the team? Oh, the council. Yeah, that's okay, Rita.
Fabulous presentations, well done to each one of you. Lovely work. I always hear going on in medical science from my neighbour in the office, Sharon. Eleanor, when you said you had 5 assessment pieces and you'd allow the student grade out of their 4 best, that's a lovely idea in terms of you know, giving them the best chance. But do you find that strategically thinking student not bothering to do the last one, or dropping one and not attempting it at all? Or do you tell them at the outset that they'll be graded on their 4 best? I know I sound like a moonshore now a little bit, but.
I do. I tell them, originally when I did it first, I actually decided at the end of the module to take best 4 for each. And it was a lovely bonus, they got that great news. But then over time, I told them from the start. And my experience has been that yes, some of them, the best ones won't. Ones that are maybe a little bit, you know, slower on, you know, presenting stuff or submitting stuff. Yeah, there'll always be people in the class that will need that content.
I guess it's not a reason not to do it, but I'd be afraid of my last assessment piece, if that was a key learning, that they might all drop that one if they're under pressure approaching exam time. Or you didn't have that experience though, no, that they all ignored the last one? Or
yeah, I suppose the thing about that is that there wouldn't be any particular learning outcome. So
yeah. So you just make sure of that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Hi, can I ask another question? And I just met Brigid at the break, and she was telling me that she's a graduate of the exact program she's now lecturing on, which I thought was so. My question is relating to that, and I know she's finishing up her PhD, or finished her PhD, and waiting for her Viva. So best luck with that.
Congratulations.
So my question to you, and I suppose to the rest of the presenters and the program board, is it was probably, I'm imagining, really useful having a relatively recent graduate. When did you graduate, Brigid? 2017. Okay, so relatively recent graduate of the program on the other side. So you had the student view fairly recently. I'm just wondering, did that help you inform your creation of your assessment? And did you, because these were all previously your own lecturers, so hopefully you weren't intimidated by them, were you able to share, you know, your more recent student view with them to help shape the whole reimagining of assessment?
Yeah, so definitely the course
it's just for the online users now, really.
So yeah, when I completed the course in second year, I suppose the scientific communications module wasn't as medical science focused, so I found it actually really good that it had been kind of developed over the years to be more focused on things like ethical communication of patient results that you will use. So from that perspective, I suppose I thought it was great, the changes that had occurred over the years. So, and definitely I've been, like, I can't thank the program team enough for helping me kind of get up to speed with everything. I think they're always very open to, you know, feedback and suggestions and things like that. So absolutely, I think that going forward, maybe I should be more vocal in saying how I found it as a student. But to be honest, in your first year of teaching, it's definitely just keeping your head above water. But yeah, so I hope that answers your question.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Very good. And I'm certainly, it was a big challenge for you. I suppose you had the end of COVID as well to cope with becoming a lecturer. So good, well done, you know, all you've achieved. So do we have another question? Sorry, was there another? Oh, sorry. Sorry, I missed that.
Thanks very much. So just, yeah, thanks again for sharing. I suppose what I'm really interested in is the peer assessment side, or the peer review, because it's something I'm hoping to start bringing into some of my work. And I suppose trying to maybe wrap my head around, how do I support students to assess their peers' work? Should a mark be giving? How do I train them to do that? Because it's something extremely new. I suppose I've been doing it, as I mentioned earlier on, just kind of objectively with a sample piece of work. But how, you know, kind of that peer dynamic, how is that managed, maybe from your own experiences? Thanks very much.
You have to be very, very clear exactly what you're looking for.
Yeah, just for the online users.
Okay. Hello, all online users. I think you have to be very clear in terms of what you're looking for when you're setting them up for peer assessment. I do it 2 ways. I do it the way I do it for the medical science maths, because maths is kind of easier like that. I can use the workshop function. I have another module in biopharmaceutical science where they do a project and they peer review each other. And for that, I just have to give them criteria of what I'm expecting them to judge each other against. I think once you've got your framework worked out, I think it works fairly handily. But it's a very interesting process to do peer review, because initially I thought they would all kind of immediately give each other really high marks, but interestingly they don't. And they're extremely honest. And I wasn't expecting, I was quite blown away by the fact that they were extremely honest in the way in which they reviewed each other. Does that answer your question?
I just got anything on that. Do you want to answer?
Sorry, just more, I suppose that was actually peer assessment was the topic of my PhD, so I couldn't let it go without saying something. Sorry. And I suppose I would have a lot, and it was a framework that I developed that I'm quite happy to share with you. But I think sometimes we think of peer assessment just kind of in a synopsis as kind of, there's a little bit more work, but the work is front loaded. So it's extremely important, the design of your activity, the engagement of the students with the criteria and their understanding of the criteria is really, really important. The use of exemplars would be definitely recommended. The feedback that I've got from students that have used peer assessment is they don't like the marking element of it, and that can be problematic, and it depends on the activity. Using it anonymous definitely can be good, but if it's like a poster presentation, and I did this across a number of different institutes, so there can be a whole thing of favoritism or competitiveness. So the summative nature is definitely problematic, so it needs to be handled carefully. But the learning from peer assessment is from being a reviewer, and that needs to be stressed to the student. That's what I would say. They learn more from, it's almost like a self-assessment kind of learning. So that would just be my 2 cents worth on that there, yeah.
So maybe the recommendation is to give them marks for reviewing as opposed to taking the mark that they give them. So give feedback, you get a mark, and give feedback. That's what the workshop does. And give the marks for it. Sorry, so we preempted what you were going to say.
Sorry, I was just going to come in there, and I suppose Mary has said it all there and her whole PhD is on it. But from the perspective of, we just introduced it to the module that I was talking about. So Trish has much more experience of doing it. Mary has a PhD in it, but we were, for the module that I was talking about, the video, we literally just introduced the peer assessment component this semester, so just 2 months ago. So we were very new to it, but I guess the reason we wanted to introduce it was I have seen over the years when they work as a group, it was a group mark that they were getting. And some students used to feel that was a little bit unfair because they may not all have done equal work. I used to ask them to submit who did what and, divide the workload, but that was their responsibility. I didn't tell them who was to do what. That was kind of a group responsibility, the breakdown of the work. So this year, as I said, we just introduced out of the 100 marks, 5 marks for a peer review section. And my colleague Sharon worked on the peer assessment form. And now, again, we do need to go back and look at it probably for next year. And again, what Mary was talking about there, look at it maybe a bit more detail and giving the students a little bit more information around it. But we found that it actually worked really well this year, because what it meant was the students there was 5 questions. They answered them in relation to working with other people. And our last question was to, rank, to give their group members a score out of 10 for how they felt they contributed to the workload. And what Sharon did then, she was evaluating them. Say if you're in a group of 4, so you're evaluating 3 other people, each person would get 3 marks from their colleagues. She took an average of that mark then and gave it out of 5. And interestingly, they weren't all giving each other 10 out of 10 or 9 out of 10. So we're coming at it from a very new perspective and just introducing it, but it seems to have worked well. We didn't give it a huge weighting this year, but it's something we might go back and revisit. I definitely think we'll keep it as part of the grading rubric, because they didn't all get the exact same grade for the assignment because of that, even 5 marks that was, that's inbuilt into it now. And I said we might go back and revisit it and look at how we could improve it. We'll have to get some tips from our resident expert for next year maybe. So yeah.
What I actually used as well, Maura, was I used Microsoft Forms for the peer review part. In other words, they got a mark for a presentation, and then they were asked to review each other in terms of who contributed the most to this project, who contributed, who was innovative, and there was loads of categories. I can share that with you. And basically then they filled it out for each other, and that gave them a kind of a different mark as well. But there was a mark for the actual presentation, but then marked specially for contribution.
Good. Great example. Thanks very much, ladies, and well done on all the fantastic work this year. So thanks for all your contributions to the project. And